Ethan's boots crunched against the ash-covered ground as he scanned the desolate battlefield. The air was heavy with the smell of smoke and scorched metal. His squad had already evacuated, but something told him to stay behind. He'd heard a faint sound, a cry, or maybe just his imagination, coming from the ruins of a shattered building. "Come on, Ethan," he muttered to himself. "You're just hearing things." But he couldn't ignore it. His conscience wouldn't let him. Tightening his grip on his rifle, he cautiously stepped over fallen debris and twisted metal, his eyes darting around for any sign of movement. Then he saw her. Among the rubble lay a girl, barely conscious. Her skin was a soft pale blue, her long white hair tangled and dirtied by dust. She was young, probably no older than 20. Her clothes, though torn and burned, hinted at something regal. Maybe a diplomat, maybe a refugee. Ethan's breath caught. He'd never seen anyone like her before. Alien species weren't uncommon in this war-torn galaxy, but she stood out. Fragile, out of place, and completely helpless. "Hey," he called softly, lowering his weapon. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing deep violet irises that seemed to glow faintly, even in the dim light. She tried to speak, but only a weak gasp escaped her lips. "You're hurt," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "I'll get you out of here." He wasn't sure how he was going to do it. The extraction ship was gone, and the enemy could return at any moment. But he couldn't leave her here. Sliding his arms beneath her, he lifted her carefully. She was lighter than he expected, her delicate frame almost weightless. She winced in pain, her head resting against his shoulder. "Hang on," he whispered. "You're safe now." Ethan moved quickly, weaving through the ruins and keeping to the shadows. His training kicked in, every step calculated and cautious. He didn't know who she was or why she was here, but that didn't matter. She was alive, and that was reason enough to fight for her. Behind him, the distant roar of engines grew louder. Enemy patrols. They were searching for survivors, and Ethan knew they wouldn't show mercy. He ducked into a crumbled alleyway, pressing himself against the wall. The girl stirred slightly in his arms, her eyes flickering open again. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yeah," Ethan replied, keeping his voice low. "But we're not out of this yet." The patrol passed by, their searchlights sweeping the area. Ethan held his breath, waiting until the light moved on. Then he slipped out of the alley, heading for the edge of the city. Hours felt like days as he navigated the dangerous terrain. His muscles ached, his mind raced, but he didn't stop. Every now and then, he glanced down at her, making sure she was still breathing. Finally, as dawn began to break, Ethan reached the extraction point, a hidden bunker used by resistance fighters. He gently laid her down on a makeshift bed, grabbing supplies to treat her wounds. "You're going to be okay," he said, more to himself than to her. She opened her eyes again, looking at him with a mix of gratitude and wonder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure what to say. He didn't know who she was or why she mattered, but something about her felt important. As she drifted into unconsciousness, Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. He didn't realize it yet, but this simple act of kindness would change both their lives forever. Years had passed since that fateful day. Ethan had left the war behind, choosing a quiet life on a remote Earth colony. The lush green fields and the soft hum of wind turbines were a welcome change from the chaos he had once known. He spent his days fixing machines for the townsfolk and his nights staring at the stars, wondering if anyone out there remembered him. Life was peaceful, but sometimes peace felt lonely. One evening, as Ethan worked on a broken drone in his workshop, he heard an unusual sound, deep and rhythmic, like the hum of an engine but far more powerful. He froze, his wrench slipping from his hand. The sound grew louder, vibrating the walls of his modest home. Curiosity and caution pulled him outside. The sky above his small farm was dark, but something shimmered. A sleek, metallic ship descending slowly, its surface reflecting the faint light of the moon. It wasn't like any human craft Ethan had ever seen. "What in the—" Ethan muttered, his heart racing. The ship landed gently in the open field beyond his workshop, its engines hissing as they powered down. Ethan grabbed his old rifle from inside, just in case. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but old habits died hard. The ship's ramp lowered with a soft whir, and Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon. But what stepped out wasn't a threat. It was her. She looked almost exactly as he remembered. Pale blue skin, white hair flowing like silk, and violet eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. But there was something different about her now. She stood tall, her posture regal, her clothing intricate and adorned with symbols that glinted in the faint light. Ethan's breath caught. It was the girl he had saved all those years ago. "Do you remember me?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Ethan lowered his rifle slowly, his mind reeling. Yes, I remember. You're the girl from the ruins." A small smile played on her lips. "Not just a girl," she said, stepping closer. "My name is Alara. I am the princess of my people." Ethan blinked, trying to process her words. A princess. He had saved a princess. Before he could respond, Alara continued, her tone filled with emotion. "You saved my life when I was at my weakest. Because of you, I lived to reclaim my throne. My people owe you a debt we can never repay." Ethan shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around what was happening. "I was just doing what anyone would have done. I didn't know who you were." "And yet you risked everything for a stranger," Alara said, her eyes glistening. "That is why I am here, to thank you and to ensure your safety." "Safety?" Ethan frowned. "From what?" Alara hesitated, glancing back at her ship. "There are those who would harm you to get to me. They know what you did, and they see you as a link to me. I cannot allow that." Ethan let out a dry laugh, disbelief creeping into his voice. "So, what? You're here to be my bodyguard." "In a way," Alara said, stepping even closer. "But more than that, I am here because I owe you my life, and because I wanted to see you again." Her last words hung in the air, and Ethan found himself at a loss for what to say. Before he could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the night. Alara's expression shifted from soft to sharp. "They're already here," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "We need to move. Now." Ethan didn't know who they were, but he could tell from her tone that it wasn't good. Without hesitation, he grabbed his gear and followed her toward the ship. Whatever was coming, he had a feeling his peaceful life was about to get a lot more complicated. Ethan's heart pounded as he followed Alara into her ship. The interior was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Smooth, glowing panels lined the walls, pulsating softly as if the ship itself was alive. The air inside was cool and carried a faint, unfamiliar scent. Alara moved with purpose, her flowing garments brushing the polished floor. She gestured for Ethan to take a seat in one of the sleek chairs near the control console. "Strap in," she said, her tone firm but calm. Ethan obeyed, fumbling with the unfamiliar harness. The ramp behind them hissed shut, sealing them inside as the ship hummed to life. Within seconds, they were airborne, the ground disappearing beneath them. Ethan glanced at Alara. "So, are you going to tell me what's going on? Who are we running from?" Alara's hands moved quickly over the console, her violet eyes scanning the holographic displays. "There are factions within my kingdom who still oppose me. They see me as a threat to their power. When they discovered I came here to find you, they sent bounty hunters to intercept us." Ethan leaned back, trying to process her words. "So, because I saved you years ago, I've suddenly become a target." Alara turned to face him, her expression softening. "I didn't mean to put you in danger, Ethan, but I couldn't stay away. I owe you my life, and I needed to see you again." Her words stirred something deep within him. He had always wondered what happened to her after that day. To see her now, strong and determined, filled him with a strange sense of pride. Before he could respond, the ship jolted violently. Alarms blared, and the holographic displays lit up with red warnings. "They found us," Alara said, her voice tense. Ethan peered out the window and saw two smaller ships pursuing them, their sleek designs bristling with weapons. "Can't this thing go any faster?" he asked, gripping the armrests. Alara smirked despite the tension. "Hold on." The ship surged forward, the engines roaring as it zigzagged through the sky. Ethan was pressed back into his seat as they evaded laser fire. Explosions lit up the night, but Alara's skillful piloting kept them one step ahead. Ethan's grip tightened as the ship swerved sharply, dodging another blast. "Do you need me to do anything, or should I just sit here and hope we don't die?" Alara glanced at him with a faint smile. "There's a weapons console to your left. If you're up for it, I could use some help." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He unstrapped himself and slid into the seat, scanning the controls. They were unfamiliar, but the layout was intuitive enough. His military training kicked in as he activated the ship's defenses. "Got it," he said, gripping the controls. "Let's see what this baby can do." As the enemy ships closed in, Ethan fired back, sending bolts of energy streaking through the sky. One of the pursuers took a direct hit and exploded in a brilliant flash. "Not bad," Alara said, her tone approving. "Thanks," Ethan replied, focusing on the second ship. The remaining pursuer was more agile, weaving through the sky as it returned fire. Alara's ship shook from the impact of a glancing shot, but she remained calm, guiding them through a narrow canyon to lose their tail. Ethan fired again, this time hitting one of the enemy's engines. The ship spiraled out of control, crashing into the rocky terrain below. "Got him," Ethan exclaimed, his adrenaline pumping. Alara sighed in relief, her hands steady on the controls. "Nice shooting." As the ship climbed higher, leaving the danger behind, Ethan leaned back and let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "this is definitely more exciting than fixing drones." Alara chuckled softly, her earlier tension fading. "I'm glad to see you haven't lost your sense of humor." Ethan turned to her, his expression serious now. "What's next? They know where I live, and it sounds like they're not going to stop coming." Alara nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Then we'll have to stay ahead of them. I have allies waiting for us, but it's going to be a dangerous journey." Ethan's gaze softened. "You saved me back there. I guess we're even now." "No," Alara said, her voice firm but warm. "I'll never stop repaying the debt I owe you." Ethan didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. Life with Alara was going to be anything but ordinary. The hum of the ship's engines was steady as Alara set a course for deep space. Ethan sat beside her, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. His thoughts raced as he tried to piece everything together. A few days ago, his life was quiet and predictable. Now he was flying through space with a princess, dodging bounty hunters who wanted him dead. "You've been quiet," Alara said, her hands gliding over the controls. "I'm just trying to figure out how my life got so crazy," Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair. Alara smiled faintly, her violet eyes glinting in the dim light. "I didn't mean for you to be dragged into this. If you want, I can drop you somewhere safe. My fight isn't your fight." Ethan shook his head. "I think we're past that point. Besides, I've got a knack for trouble. Might as well put it to good use." Her smile widened, a flicker of relief crossing her face. "I'm glad to hear that. I could use someone like you." Suddenly, the ship's console beeped urgently. Alara's expression turned serious as she scanned the holographic display. "What now?" Ethan asked, sitting up straight. "A tracking beacon," Alara said, her voice tight. "They've marked us. It's how they found us so quickly before." Ethan frowned. "Can you disable it?" Alara nodded. "Yes, but it's not that simple. We'll need to land somewhere safe first. If we don't remove it soon, They'll keep following us. Any ideas where we can go? There's an old refueling station on the edge of this sector, she said, pulling up a map. It's abandoned, but it should have the tools we need. Ethan nodded. Let's do it. As the ship veered toward the station, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every silence felt too quiet. When they arrived, the station was exactly as Alara had described. Dark, empty, and eerily still. The massive structure floated in the void, its metal exterior battered by years of neglect. Alara guided the ship into a docking bay, and the engines powered down with a low hum. "Stay alert," she said as they stepped out. Ethan grabbed a small flashlight from the ship and scanned the area. The station was cold and lifeless, its corridors lined with rusted machinery and flickering lights. "This place gives me the creeps," Ethan muttered. Alara smirked. "You've faced worse, haven't you?" "True, but that doesn't mean I like it." They made their way to a control room where Alara began working on the beacon signal. Ethan stood guard, his hand resting on the handle of his weapon. The station's silence pressed in around them, broken only by the occasional hiss of steam from old pipes. Just as Alara was making progress, a distant clang echoed through the corridors. Ethan's body tensed. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Alara didn't look up. "I'm almost done. Keep watch." Ethan nodded, stepping toward the door. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by the faint hum of machinery coming to life. "They're here," Ethan said, his voice low. Alara's fingers flew over the console. "I just need a little more time." Ethan gripped his weapon, his pulse quickening. A moment later, shadows moved at the far end of the corridor. Figures emerged, armored bounty hunters, their weapons raised and glowing faintly in the dim light. "Company's here," Ethan called out, raising his rifle. The hunters didn't hesitate. Energy blasts lit up the corridor, forcing Ethan to duck behind a rusted crate. He returned fire, his shots precise and controlled. "I'm almost done," Alara shouted over the noise. "Take your time," Ethan muttered sarcastically, firing another shot. The battle was intense but short-lived. Alara finished disabling the beacon just as Ethan took out the last hunter. Breathing heavily, he turned to her. "Next time," he said, "let's pick a safer spot." Alara chuckled, though her expression was tired. "Noted. Let's get out of here." As they returned to the ship, Ethan couldn't help but feel that the trouble was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Ethan slumped into his seat aboard the ship, wiping sweat from his brow. His breathing was still heavy from the fight, but the adrenaline pumping through his veins made him feel alive. Across the cabin, Alara was working quickly at the console, her fingers gliding over the holographic controls to double-check that the tracking beacon had been disabled. "Well?" Ethan asked, catching his breath. Alara nodded, her expression one of relief. "It's gone. They can't track us anymore." "Good," Ethan replied, "because I'm not sure I've got another firefight in me today." Alara turned to him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You handled yourself well back there." "Yeah, well," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "Guess I haven't lost my touch." Their moment of calm was interrupted by a soft beep from the console. Alara's smile vanished as she leaned forward, scanning the display. "What is it now?" Ethan asked, sitting up. "Long-range sensors," Alara replied, her voice tense. "A fleet is heading this way." "A fleet? How many ships are we talking about?" "Too many," Alara said, her fingers flying over the controls. "They must have guessed our destination. We need to leave. Now." The ship roared to life as Alara powered up the engines. Ethan strapped himself in, bracing for what was to come. The view outside the window shifted as the station disappeared behind them, replaced by the dark void of space. But the fleet wasn't far behind. Within moments, the sensors lit up with warning signals. Multiple ships were closing in fast, their weapons systems locking onto Alara's vessel. They're not messing around, Ethan muttered, gripping the armrests of his seat. Alara's hands moved with precision as she maneuvered the ship, weaving through the stars in an attempt to shake their pursuers. The enemy ships fired relentlessly, bright streaks of energy cutting through the darkness. "Hold on," Alara shouted, throwing the ship into a sharp dive. Ethan was pressed into his seat as the ship spun and twisted, narrowly avoiding the incoming fire. His heart raced as he watched the enemy ships closing the distance. "This isn't looking good," he said, his voice tight. Alara's expression was calm, but her violet eyes burned with determination. "We're not done yet." She activated the ship's defensive systems, deploying a series of flares and countermeasures that exploded in bright flashes behind them. The tactic worked, temporarily blinding their pursuers and buying them precious seconds. Ethan's grip on the armrest loosened slightly. "Nice move." "Thank you," Alara replied, a hint of pride in her voice. But the fleet wasn't giving up. One of the enemy ships broke away from the group, accelerating to intercept them. Alara's ship shook violently as it was hit by a glancing shot. Warning lights flashed, and alarms blared throughout the cabin. "Shields are down to 50%, Alara announced. Ethan unstrapped himself and moved to the weapons console. "Guess it's my turn again." He activated the ship's weapon systems, targeting the pursuing ship. The enemy pilot was skilled, dodging Ethan's initial shots with ease. "Come on," Ethan muttered, focusing on the target. Alara swerved the ship sharply, giving Ethan a clear shot. He fired, and the energy bolt struck the enemy ship's engine. It spiraled out of control before exploding in a brilliant flash of light. "Got one," Ethan exclaimed, adrenaline surging through him. "Good shot," Alara said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "But we're not out of this yet." More ships were closing in, their weapons lighting up the void. Alara's ship shuddered as another blast hit them, this time knocking out a section of the hull. "Damage to the lower deck," Alara reported, her hand steady on the controls. "We need to jump to hyperspace." "Can this thing even handle that in its condition?" Ethan asked, glancing at the damage indicators. "It has to," Alara replied firmly. She input the coordinates into the navigation system, her focus unshaken despite the chaos around them. Ethan could only watch as she activated the hyperdrive. The ship jolted forward, the stars outside stretching into long, bright lines as they entered hyperspace. The enemy ships disappeared from view, left behind in the vastness of space. Ethan let out a long breath, his muscles relaxing for the first time in what felt like hours. Alara leaned back in her seat, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We've escaped for now, but they'll keep coming." Ethan nodded. "Then we better figure out our next move." The ship sailed silently through hyperspace, but both of them knew the real fight was far from over. The ship's hum was steady as it drifted through hyperspace, but inside the cabin, tension was thick. Ethan leaned against the wall, inspecting the damage to his jacket from the earlier fight. Alara sat at the console, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced precision. Despite their escape, the weight of the pursuit hung heavy over them. "How bad is the ship?" Ethan finally asked, breaking the silence. Alara sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "The hull is damaged, shields are at 30%, and the hyperdrive is running on borrowed time. We'll need repairs soon." Ethan frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Do you have a place in mind?" "There's a hidden outpost not far from here," she replied, pulling up a holographic map. "It belongs to my allies. They'll help us." "And what's the catch?" Ethan asked, his voice skeptical. Alara hesitated, her gaze dropping for a moment. "It's not entirely safe. The outpost is in disputed territory. We'll be walking into potential danger." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Danger seems to be our theme lately." As the ship exited hyperspace, the stars returned to their familiar sparkle. In the distance, Ethan saw the outpost, a large, rugged structure built into the side of an asteroid. It was surrounded by debris, old wreckage, and floating mines, a testament to the battles fought in the area. "This place doesn't exactly scream friendly," Ethan muttered. "It's secure," Alara assured him. "But stay close. Not everyone here can be trusted." The ship docked in one of the outpost hangars, the bay dimly lit and filled with mismatched vessels. As the ramp lowered, Alara stepped out first, her posture regal and commanding. Ethan followed, his hand resting on the weapon holstered at his side. The hangar was bustling with activity. Mechanics worked on ships, traders bartered over supplies, and armed guards patrolled the area. The atmosphere was tense, with an unspoken rule that everyone was watching everyone else. A tall figure approached them, clad in dark armor with a helmet that obscured his face. He stopped a few feet away and removed the helmet, revealing a weathered face with sharp features and piercing gray eyes. "Princess Alara," the man said, his voice deep and formal. "We weren't expecting you." "Circumstances forced my hand, Captain Rylan," Alara replied. "We need repairs and safe passage." Ryland's gaze shifted to Ethan, his expression hardening. "And who is this?" "A trusted ally," Alara said firmly, leaving no room for argument. Raylan's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "Follow me." As they walked through the outpost, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The guards' eyes lingered on him, their hands never far from their weapons. "You weren't kidding about the trust issues," Ethan whispered to Alara. "They're loyal, but cautious," she replied quietly. "We'll be fine." They arrived at a small chamber where Ryland gestured for them to sit. "The repairs will take time," he said, "but you should know, word of your presence has already spread. It won't be long before your enemies catch wind of it." "We won't stay long," Alara said. "Just enough to fix the ship and resupply." Ryland hesitated, then leaned closer. "There's another matter. A bounty has been placed on your head, Princess. A significant one." Ethan's jaw tightened. "How much?" Ryland's expression darkened. "Enough to tempt even the loyal." Alara's face remained calm, but Ethan could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. "We'll manage," she said firmly. "Thank you, Ryland." As they left the chamber, Ethan turned to her. "You think we can trust him?" "I don't know," Alara admitted, "but we don't have much choice." The repairs began, but the tension in the air grew thicker with each passing hour. Ethan stayed close to Alara, his instincts on high alert. The outpost was a powder keg, and it felt like a single spark could set it off. Late that night, as they sat in the dimly lit quarters provided to them, Ethan spoke up. "You've risked everything for your people, haven't you?" Alara looked at him, her expression softening. "It's my duty. They're my responsibility." Ethan nodded, his respect for her deepening. "And now, you've got me risking everything too." Alara smiled faintly. "You didn't have to come with me, Ethan, but I'm glad you did." As they shared a moment of quiet understanding, neither of them noticed the shadowy figure lurking just outside their quarters, listening and waiting. The danger they had tried to escape was closer than ever. The repairs were almost complete. The hum of machinery echoed through the hangar as mechanics worked tirelessly on Alara's ship. Ethan stood nearby, scanning the bustling outpost with a wary eye. He couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was closing in. "Do you think they'll come?" Ethan asked, glancing at Alara. "They always do," she replied, her voice calm, but her posture tense. Before Ethan could respond, the lights in the hangar flickered. A cold dread settled over him as an alarm blared through the outpost. "They're here," Alara said, her voice firm. Ethan's hand went to his weapon as he turned toward the docking bay entrance. The large metal doors groaned open, and a group of heavily armed bounty hunters stormed in. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running across his face, stepped forward. "Princess Alara," he called out, his voice carrying the sinister edge. "You've made this far too easy." Ethan stepped in front of Alara, his weapon raised. "If you want her, You'll have to go through me. The leader smirked. That can be arranged. The hangar erupted into chaos as the bounty hunters opened fire. Alara darted behind cover, activating her personal shield. Ethan returned fire, his shots precise and unrelenting. The outpost guards joined the fight, but the bounty hunters were well-equipped and relentless. Explosions rocked the hangar as crates and equipment were destroyed in the crossfire. Ethan ducked behind a stack of crates, reloading his weapon. Got any bright ideas, Princess? Alara peeked over her cover, assessing the situation. We need to get to the ship. It's our only chance. Easier said than done, Ethan shouted, firing at an approaching hunter. Alara pulled out a small device from her belt and pressed a button. The ship's engines roared to life, its lights flickering on as it prepared for takeoff. Cover me, she yelled, sprinting toward the ship. Ethan didn't hesitate. He laid down suppressing fire, forcing the bounty hunters to take cover as Alara ran. She reached the ramp and turned, gesturing for Ethan to follow. Come on. Ethan bolted, weaving through the chaos as energy bolts zipped past him. He made it to the ship just as a blast exploded behind him, throwing him onto the ramp. Alara grabbed his arm, pulling him inside. Are you all right? Never better, Ethan muttered, wincing as he got to his feet. The ship's ramp closed, sealing them inside. Alara sprinted to the cockpit, taking the pilot's seat as Ethan collapsed into the chair beside her. Hold on, she said, her hands flying over the controls. The ship lifted off, its engines roaring as it shot out of the hangar. Bounty hunter ships were already in pursuit, their weapons lighting up the void. We're not out of this yet, Ethan said, strapping in. Alara nodded, her violet eyes focused. Then let's finish it. She maneuvered the ship with precision, weaving through the debris field surrounding the outpost. Ethan manned the weapons console, firing at their pursuers with everything the ship had. One by one, the enemy ships fell. Explosions lit up the darkness as Ethan's shots found their marks. We've got 2 left, Alara said, her voice steady. Ethan targeted the nearest ship, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash, leaving only one pursuer. But the last bounty hunter was relentless, closing in fast. Alara pushed the ship to its limits, her knuckles white, as she gripped the controls. Hang on, she yelled, diving toward a nearby asteroid. The bounty hunter followed, but Alara pulled up at the last second. The enemy ship wasn't as agile, crashing into the asteroid in a fiery explosion. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Nice flying. Alara smiled faintly, her hands relaxing on the controls. Nice shooting. As the stars stretched into lines around them, the ship entered hyperspace, leaving the chaos behind. Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaustion washing over him. Think that's the last of them. For now, Alara replied, her tone soft. But there will always be more. Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. Then I guess we'll just have to keep fighting. Alara met his gaze, a hint of a smile on her lips. Together, the ship sailed on, carrying them toward an uncertain future. But for the first time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The quiet hum of the ship's engines filled the cabin as Ethan sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. The adrenaline from their escape had faded, leaving him exhausted but strangely calm. Alara, seated beside him, worked silently at the console, her expression a mix of determination and weariness. How far until we reach your allies? Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Not far now, Alara replied, her voice steady. We're heading to my kingdom's outer stronghold. It's well defended and hidden from our enemies. Ethan nodded, leaning back in his chair. Good. We could both use some rest. As the ship approached the stronghold, a massive structure came into view. Built into a rocky moon, it resembled a fortress more than a city, with towering walls and shimmering energy shields protecting it from any attack. The sight was both imposing and awe-inspiring. "That's your stronghold?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide. Alara smiled faintly. "One of them. It's the safest place for us right now." The ship was guided into a docking bay by a group of escorts, their sleek vessels flying in perfect formation. As the ramp lowered, Alara stood tall, her posture regal despite her obvious fatigue. "Ethan," she said, turning to him, "stay close. My people will be curious about you." "Curious?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're the human who saved their princess," Alara said, a hint of amusement in her tone. "That makes you important." Ethan chuckled dryly. "Great. No pressure." They stepped off the ship and were immediately met by a group of Alara's loyal guards. Clad in elegant armor, they bowed deeply as Alara approached. "Princess," their leader said, his voice filled with reverence. "It's an honor to have you back safely." Alara nodded, her expression warm. "Thank you, Commander Thaler. We've been through much, but we're safe for now." Thaler's gaze shifted to Ethan, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And this is a trusted ally," Alara said firmly. "Without him, I wouldn't be here today." Thaler hesitated but nodded. "Then he is welcome here." As they were escorted through the stronghold, Ethan couldn't help but feel out of place. The grand halls were lined with intricate carvings and glowing symbols, and everyone they passed stopped to bow to Alara. "This is all a bit much," Ethan muttered to Alara. She smiled softly. "You'll get used to it." They were led to a grand chamber where Alara's advisors awaited her. The room was filled with murmurs that ceased the moment she entered. The advisors rose from their seats, their faces a mix of relief and respect. "Princess Alara," one of them said, his voice trembling with emotion. "We feared the worst. Your return is a blessing to us all." Alara stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "I am here because of Ethan. He saved me not once, but twice. I owe him my life, and so does this kingdom." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Ethan. He shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. "I'm just a guy trying to do the right thing," Ethan said finally. Alara's lips curved into a small smile. "Sometimes that's exactly what the galaxy needs." The advisors began discussing the state of the kingdom and the threats they still faced. Ethan listened quietly, trying to make sense of the political complexities. Hours later, as the meeting concluded, Alara led Ethan to a private balcony overlooking the fortress. The view was breathtaking. Stars stretched endlessly across the sky, and the moon's surface glittered with activity below. "You did more than save me," Alara said, breaking the silence. "You gave me hope when I had none." Ethan turned to her, his expression soft. "You would have done the same for me." Alara smiled, her violet eyes shimmering in the starlight. "Perhaps, but it doesn't change what you've done. You're part of this now, Ethan. My people will look to you as a hero." "I'm no hero," Ethan said, shaking his head. "To me, you are," Alara said quietly. For the first time, Ethan felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known he was missing. As they stood together, watching the stars, he realized that his life had changed forever, not just because of the danger, but because of the bond he now shared with Alara. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Ethan knew they would face them together. The stronghold buzzed with life as preparations began for the kingdom's resurgence. Ethan walked through the grand halls, feeling like an outsider in a place filled with people bowing to Alara's every word. Yet he couldn't deny the pride swelling in his chest when they looked at him with respect. Days had passed since their arrival, and while repairs to the ship were underway, Alara had been busy rallying her people. Ethan often found himself watching her from the shadows, marveling at her strength and resolve. She wasn't just a princess, she was a leader, and her people adored her. Today was different, though. Alara had asked Ethan to join her in the council chamber. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by the sight of advisors and commanders gathered around a massive holographic map of the galaxy. Alara stood at the head of the table, her regal presence commanding attention. "Ethan," she said, smiling warmly as he entered. "I'm glad you're here." He nodded, still feeling slightly out of place. "What's going on?" "We've received intelligence about our enemies," Alara explained. "The factions pursuing me have regrouped. They plan to strike at our stronghold to eliminate us once and for all." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Then why are you smiling? That doesn't sound like good news." Alara's eyes sparkled with determination. "Because this time, we're ready." She gestured to the holographic map, highlighting key positions around the stronghold. "We've fortified our defenses and devised a strategy to turn their aggression against them. But I need your help, Ethan. Your expertise in combat tactics could make the difference." Ethan hesitated, the weight of her request sinking in. "I'm not a strategist. I'm just a soldier." "And that's exactly what we need," Alara said. "Someone who understands the battlefield, who can think like they do." The room fell silent as everyone awaited Ethan's response. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. "All right, let's do this." The next few days were a blur of activity. Ethan worked closely with Alara and her commanders, refining their plans and preparing for the inevitable battle. Despite the tension, Ethan felt a strange sense of belonging. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was making a difference. When the attack finally came, it was as brutal as they had anticipated. Enemy ships swarmed the stronghold, their weapons blazing. But Alara's forces were prepared. Ethan took command of a defensive unit, coordinating their firepower to repel the enemy's advances. The battle raged on, explosions lighting up the sky as both sides fought fiercely. Amid the chaos, Ethan found himself fighting side by side with Alara. She moved with grace and precision, her violet eyes blazing with determination. Together, they pushed back wave after wave of attackers. Finally, after hours of relentless combat, the enemy forces began to retreat. Cheers erupted across the stronghold as victory became clear. Ethan slumped against a wall, exhausted but triumphant. Alara approached him, her face streaked with dirt, but her smile radiant. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," Ethan corrected, a tired smile tugging at his lips. Alara extended a hand, pulling him to his feet. "You're a hero, Ethan. My people owe you more than they can ever repay." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't do it for the glory. I did it for you." Her smile softened, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their bond unspoken but deeply felt. In the days that followed, the stronghold transformed. The people celebrated their victory, and Alara's leadership solidified her place as a beacon of hope. Ethan, though still uncertain of his role in this new world, found himself drawn to the sense of purpose he had long been missing. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the rebuilt stronghold, Alara turned to him. "Stay with me, Ethan. There's so much more we can achieve together." Ethan looked out at the stars, the vastness of the galaxy reminding him of how far he'd come. He turned back to her, his decision clear. "I'm not going anywhere." Alara smiled, her violet eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper. Together, they stood side by side, ready to face whatever the galaxy had in store. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he belonged.